Morning, afternoon, everybody, and really appreciate you staying for the second day of the symposium to hear about the great keynote we just had and presentations. And now we are moving to a more kind of a panel discussion type of a program. My name is Linda Annala-Tesfaye, for the ones who were not here yesterday. I wanted to share with you first the kind of goal of the panel discussion and why we have jointly with Hanna Matinpuro from Siemenpuu NGO, why we wanted to organize and bring these people into discussion. So the kind of question or goal that's driving the panel is that why should policymakers in the global north, such as Finland, understand and act upon the impacts of ecological restoration and tree planting interventions in the global majority world or global south. So with Hanna, we have been interested in asking why knowledge or research does not have an impact, what forces and political interests are against it doing their political work, and also through these questions to strengthen the link of policy making to ecologies and livelihoods in the global south as they are represented through NGO work and through research. We have 45 minutes for the panel, after which we open the discussion also for participants to ask questions. And we have selected like three themes for the panel. One is the tree planting, which we have heard a lot already during this symposium, as a kind of an introductory questions to see the perspectives of the participants to the tree planting topic. Then we'll briefly touch upon the topic of carbon markets and how now these two topics, how they play out in the research or the impact of research on policy making. Because research and policy making are very broad themes, so to kind of focus it on a few thematic areas. I think yesterday we used our other icebreaker engaging question of who has planted trees so far. So let me ask the audience, how many of you have tried to influence policy making? Okay, great. How many of you found it easy? Right. So as said, I will give the floor to our great panelists. I will introduce them shortly. So yesterday we heard our keynote speaker, Amber Huff. She's an anthropologist and political ecologist based at the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex in the UK. And her research bridges science, technology, and the politics of environmental change, exploring the relationship between evolving logic and contested ecologies of crisis, enclosure, or repair. Then we have our esteemed PhD candidate, Matthieu Pierre, in environmental management at the Doctoral School of Governance and Societies and Transition of the University of Fianarantsoa, Madagascar. And he serves as a research assistant at the Applied Research Laboratory on Forestry, Development and Environment. And since 3 years ago now, his research has focused on ecological restoration initiatives in northwestern and south central part of Madagascar through the TreesForDev project. We have Vesa Kaarakka, who is a senior advisor for development policy with forests and desertification at the Department of Development Policy, Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. And he focuses on tropical forest ecology, silviculture and management, vegetation dynamics, dryland forestry, desertification and drought, including long-term experience with the UN Convention to combat desertification. And then Hanna Matinpuro, co-organizer of this panel. She's the executive director of Siemenpuu Foundation, which is a foundation funded by Finnish environmental and development NGOs that support civil society organizations in the global south by providing funding for actors to support their own initiatives. And the support that the foundation is managing is targeted at social movements and community-level action groups that promote environmental justice, ecological democracy, and human rights. She is an advocate of community-based natural resource management and democratic open dialogues on policymaking regarding forests. So let's give a short So after these brief introductions, I thought we could just have a short kind of perspectives on all of you about tree planting as an implementation modality of ecological restoration. You can choose the context of yourself to describe your relationship with tree planting. We can maybe start with Vesa here.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentations. It would have been interesting to be able to follow the discussions on yesterday on Ethiopia, because that's Ethiopia is a special case, but you already discussed a lot in that. What about restoration? I mean, it all depends, in my opinion, on what are the aims of the restoration. Whether it's restoring the original vegetation, or whether it's restoring the functional elements of the previous ecosystem. So not necessarily to bring the original forest cover to place. It's important to analyze the earlier success stories in the region, and perhaps more widely when they are applicable. It's preferable to try to combine tree planting with natural regeneration where that is possible. Agroforestry was already mentioned, combining trees with crops or pasture, and then employing a range of restoration strategies, and of course engage the local communities in all cases. Mm-hmm. Those are some of the issues that come to my mind. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Amber, what is your perspective on tree planting?
My perspective on tree planting in the context of restoration, I think is the same as my perspective on restoration more generally. Of course, there's the as you said, what's the goal? What's the objective of the tree planting? I mean, do we want to have a nice orchard where we can pick fruits and enhance other things along with that? Or are we planting trees because there's a quota and because somebody told us that we just need as many trees as possible? What is the baseline for restoration? I think this is a really important question that doesn't get asked enough. And it also, begs a further question of how we think about ecology and ecological change in the context of a moment where restoration and repair are quite dominant in environmental intervention and ecosystem-based framings. Because restoration implies that we're going back, that we're able to go back and capture something that's been lost. This is a bigger issue, I think, than the question of whether we look at a landscape and see it as de facto degraded. That's another issue that's really important. But when we're looking and assuming that we need to go back at all costs, we lose sight of the fact that that's not how ecology works. And I think if we're looking back, then we miss really important urgent opportunities to understand the present. And opportunities that we might have in the present to encourage not restoration or looking to some, imaginary kind of golden age of, a lush forest or that. But look forward, with maybe new principles and clearer eyes, like how do we not encourage restoration, but reflourishing in ways that are suited toward the likely futures that we face. Mm-hmm.
Yes, northwestern Madagascar was amazed to see like several NGO states were intervening in the trees plantation, reforestation and restoration. I just want to highlight some dimension that sometimes we forget about the restoration. It is like it is famous to talk about the structural, the functional, and the. But I want to say like there is an importance of the social dimension of the restoration. Do we see local people as destructor and enemy of the forest, or do we see local people as being part of the forest to be restored? That is the main question, because most of the time we see reforestation, restoration, but like this local human dimension is often forget if we talk about this distributive justice, caring about the cost and the benefit. Some are a little bit marginalized. If we talk about the procedural, like in decision making, the implementation, the control, no, which is a little bit sad, are really marginalized, especially in the recognition of the practice, of the knowledge, of how to do it. So just to highlight the social dimension inside the project.
Thank you. I could continue from what Matthieu said about the social aspects, but before that, I would just tell a little bit about Siemenpuu Foundation, where I come from, just about the name, because in Finland we are usually misunderstood to do tree planting, because our name, the Siemenpuu, is a Finnish word for seed tree, which is sort of term in forestry of the seed trees that give the natural seeds for regeneration after, not after the clear cutting, but the seed tree cutting. You have these seed trees giving seeds for the new forest. But for us, it has more symbolical meaning about that what we see as the local initiatives giving small scale that sort of might, if they are allowed to bring about the changes, that lots of how we see it, that the changes and the restoration, if we are talking about that, would come from the small scale initiatives and they building together some sort of new avenues for better environments. But then about the social part, we had the opportunity to have one of our partners from Myanmar a couple of weeks here in Finland. And when I discussed with him about the restoration, well, he's coming from the Karen indigenous peoples. And for him, it really is about the when talking about the restoration or tree planting, and then it's the first question is always that to whose land we are talking about, how is governed, whose jurisdiction it is, and there what has not been possibly talked so much here during these 2 days is also, but it's really about that tree planting or ecological restoration should come with strengthening the local governance and to use the local governance methods and practices there and to strengthen those in order to have a sustainable restoration. And one more thing, just what our friend from Myanmar told is also that we would very much also like to see the restore our relationship with the nature. That's also needed. We should also concentrate on that.
One follow-up question to Vesa regarding, because he has a long-term experience working in the international climate conventions and particularly the UN Convention to combat desertification. How is tree planting approached in, for example, in the UN facility?
Well, it's one method in a in a wide collection of methods that could be used to combat desertification. Well, when it comes to drylands, it's very often so that trees are part of something else, not necessarily such, but they for instance, they are maybe important species as for fodder. They may provide some important products for the dryland, both for dryland animal and human populations, and then they can settle the soil in certain occasions. They are important, but not the part of a wider selection of tool packages that could be used to reduce deforestation and improve restoration of drylands.
Okay, thank you. So now you remember talking about the kind of re-flourishing and the kind of temporal aspects of restoration, of going back in time in the past, or moving towards some futures, maybe imaginary futures. I was interested to hear, because now when we not only going back, but with new kinds of tools, and now today we have heard about carbon markets and the different financial flows. So what do you think when we move forward towards the future with trying to aim for the past, but with new types of tools like the carbon, what kind of problems would you see that may arise?
Yeah, I think that you know, getting back to what I was saying about the riskiness of looking backward as we need to be looking forward and having a more open, clearer vision of what we face. I think one of the risks is definitely related to this idea that we can, you know, if we just get the technology right, then we can engineer something that's not messy, something that's, you know, just much more controllable, and you know, engineer predictability in an increasingly uncertain world. And I think, you know, that creates add-on risks. It creates false confidence in untested technologies, or technologies that might not be appropriate for all environments. Like, yes, there are drylands where forestry projects can be quite useful, but there are also drylands where forestry projects will destroy biodiversity, and are doing so. And, you know, in the effort, you know, especially in places where there are these like persistent myths around the notion of like past lush forests and things, where, you know, reality, you know, natural history is much more complicated than that in a lot of these landscapes we're talking about, especially when we're talking about rangeland and grassland evolution, which the repair project's involved in. These sorts of ideas, when we cast them, project them on a landscape and say, this is how it should be because this is how it used to be, when that is contrary to the ecological evidence, to the oral history, to all that we can know through other means, then what we're doing is we're amplifying risk. We're not creating security. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah.
Just some reflection on that.
Yeah. Right. How about Matthieu? Today we have talked about this kind of unpredictability regarding the ecological landscapes, how they can be measured and how they cannot be measured. For example, for the purposes of carbon, I know you have done some work related to carbon as well as part of your thesis. From your research perspective, how do you're interested in the social dynamics, how do the local or the people actually approach, or how do they respond to this type of carbon metrics, carbon measurements?
It's with TreesForDev team, Jenny, Telu and Pierre, when we conducted a study in the south center of Madagascar about this carbon project. And first of all, when you look from the website of the company which is doing it, it looks like everything is green, everything is beautiful. You are doing restoration, ecological restoration, providing job. But when you go to the ground, you see that the intervention is impacting someone's existence, communities, history, and also their future. We have seen the companies doing the kind of restoration of monoculture and then carbon market, but without the consent from local people and without recognizing the right to have their voice, to have their existence through their livelihood, through their culture. It is just like, okay, we want to make this green because this is a grassland and this will be for everybody's best, but we don't really focus on what do people think, need. We don't think about that on doing this project, and as it is like a new market, so there are the costs that people have to pay. Like for example, the land, I agree, like the land they use for raising shepherd, like it disappeared for just the conservation and the restoration. And then we will be threatened what will happen to the future, because if the market is expanding, blooming, so they will expand it more. And then it will threaten the future of the community.
The benefits that maybe
The benefit till now,
the response.
no, it doesn't worth the cost. Some take the benefit, but it doesn't reach to the local people.
Why is that, I think?
Why is that? When you are in a country where the power of the state and corporate are much more than local people who you criminalize for a long time of being destructor of the environment, and then anti-conservation, and then but the people that living their life only for the nature, and then okay, for doing that, that is that, and then there is no alternative for them to be hurt too. And then some said, okay, we don't have to say something because the state even is like somehow promoting it in some way. So yeah, the power.
Is the carbon narrative in Madagascar always attached to tree planting, or how widely has it spread?
Yes, I think in 2020, it was the beginning, like we received from World Bank like $8 million for credit carbon. I think it was the first in Madagascar. So everybody, the general opinion saying like, okay, this like going to be like for future, like the dream for future, but I would like to put presentation of friend like this is a phantom dream, which is not. We are not ready for that, I think. to look at that aspect, and then yeah, we are not ready.
And Hanna, how do carbon markets in general play out in the projects that Siemenpuu is working with?
Well, we have had during the years that we have worked a lot of different kind of partners, small groups, community groups, or it's bigger NGOs representing the communities. And it's quite varied how they look at the carbon markets, because of course, most of them would see the interest in carbon markets get funding global level. So there are some who see it really as an opportunity, or at least saw it in the beginning of the carbon markets, not possibly anymore so much because they have seen that it's not going to the local level, the funding from there. But then some of our partners have been already in the beginning been very careful to look at, to see that as a dangerous capitalization of the nature. And then about what, I guess it was Maria who said today about this corporate control coming from outside to their lands, be it corporate or be it whoever, but controlling from outside their lands. So there's, I guess there are more and more, even those who there's need for more financing for them, but more and more the NGO or the communities that we work with, they have seen it like the force solution in a way, a level. But still, there are, of course, there are some who try to find a ways how to use this. And then the like for, and one example from Kenya, from our partners. In Kenya, we work with quite many indigenous peoples organizations and indigenous peoples communities. And there in Kenya, the most preserved forest areas are those areas where the indigenous peoples have lived and still live. But now Kenyan government is more and more interested in carbon markets also. And then now they have been doing quite a lot of evictions, the indigenous peoples who have generations lived in the forests. And there are quite lots of problems with there. So our partners there see also this problem from the carbon markets, coming from how the government is looking at those and to the existing forests seen only as a marketplace and not a living place of the people who have lived there for generations.
That did you have some?
Well, just looking from a different scale, in Tanzania, which is the last remaining country where Finland still supports a traditional bilateral forest sector program, and we've been engaged in the sector there for quite for 40 years or more. While at the same time there are huge demands or requests, but particularly the countries in the Gulf region to acquire sizable areas to compensate for their released carbon. So while at the same time we try to develop participatory forestry together with the Tanzanians, so there are demands that are quite overlapping. So this is an issue also at a high level.
Okay.
What will eventually happen with those forest areas where measures and plans and all that are being developed?
Well, does this mean that a lot of the work that has been put into it will be feeding into some other?
Well, in principle, there is a risk for that, but that's of course in principle it's for Tanzania to decide what to do, but the risk is there.
Okay. To move from these topics of tree planting and carbon markets to the kind of impact of research that we have heard during these days and on policy making, because I think, yeah, in general, all kinds of restoration interventions, they encounter very complex power dynamics at multiple scales, conflicting local, international, national also interests and competing land uses for different purposes, rangelands, forest livelihoods, and others. So my main question for this part is that how can research help and negotiate nature across international, national, and local scales without creating like clear winners and losers? And how can research on ecological restoration in the global south influence policy making on ecological restoration in the global north? So I wanted to ask you, Amber, first a more detailed question. That what is your take on the relation between research and policy making on these topics?
Okay, so the relationship between, I think research is incredibly important to policymaking. Sometimes not in the ways that researchers intend. I think that there's great value for policymakers to be able to say, look, we're following the evidence, we're doing what the research shows we should do, we're making decisions based on that. But at the same time, what can undermine kind of the substance behind those claims is the reality of demand-led research. So situations that we're seeing, in the UK, for example, where I live in, where I'm based, we have a very strong tendency for decisions to be made and then the research to be demanded to support those decisions, not to inform them, but to rather give them force. And what that does, that creates biases not in the research process itself, or not only in that, but from a starting point. The terms of research funding that's attached to these calls directs towards certain questions and excludes others that might need to be asked. And I think that this is also being really profoundly affected by the sorts of changes we're seeing in national priority setting that are very, very worrisome for environmental research and evidence-based environmental policymaking. And these are things that are affected not by researchers. These are things that are affected by geopolitics. So the turn toward, we've come out of a period where environmental sustainability, whether or not you agree with the perspectives that are shaping that strongly, where environmental sustainability has been a top priority for many years across the board, across the global north, the big funders. But we are seeing even more and more shifts toward securitization, for example, migration and growth being recentered as priorities. And this is directly a response to geopolitical changes, in particular, like the chaotic stuff coming out of the United States, among other things, and just a general kind of climate of uncertainty around that. And so, so the relationship of research to policymaking is very important, but both the ways that policymakers demand and fund research and also the bigger picture situation can put shackles on researchers who are doing very, very important work. And not just researchers in the global north, but researchers, throughout the world and in the majority world as well, who often don't get a say in these policies or in these priorities.
Thank you. Do you, maybe following up on Amber and then also more broadly, Hanna, do you think that NGOs and researchers have really historically, many times, they have had in some context, collaborative relationships, also doing research together, policy briefs and other type of activities. What do you think? Should researchers and NGOs work more closely to maybe amplify some of the voices coming from people we are working with?
Yeah, sure. And I think this is one of the examples has been this project anyway, that there has been some collaboration with us and all that. So, and as you said, there already has been quite a lot of collaboration between different researchers. And so, and I think lots of the research, I was thinking, for example, like the database which was presented here yesterday, that might be also that kind of research that it might benefit more of the collaboration between some of the environmental organizations or some NGOs. So there's quite a lot of, and then of course the civil society or NGOs, we gain a lot about the information that the research is giving. So I think it's go both ways, the collaboration.
I think the concepts and others, they go both ways. I'm just thinking, is it more like for an NGO perspective, would it be more useful to have like a conceptual development collaboration, or then this kind of quantifiable database type of collaborations? What comes to your mind?
Yeah. Difficult question. I get most NGOs we work coming from somehow from the NGO sector. We work so differently in a way that the researchers to one question, and very difficult to say where to do it, and it's from different context and different researchers. So I don't know really how to answer that. So because our work is so different in a way, but there's so much like overlapping in a way. And so I think it's really from context to context where it is. In some contexts, it's really about the concepts also, and there comes a lot of understanding from both ways, and then possibly on the civil society sector, like the questions also, what to look, and we are possibly more close to the policy making arenas, and we see the problems there in a way that should be asked precisely. Sometimes the researchers are a little bit too far, and so they might not see all the sort of that kind of problems so clearly that what the NGO sector or the civil society sector sees. Then where it comes in the practice, it's different kind of questions there.
And then how about where should researchers and NGOs absolutely not work together?
It's I can't say.
Provocation. So Matthieu, I wanted to ask you about how the process would be for you, for example, to start influencing the policy making as a researcher in Madagascar context.
Well, that's a big question. I don't think this is a task to be.
It's not a single person.
Yes, so for a single person, I don't think so. I think it's kind of initiative with the past to build more stronger. But I mean, we are from the global south in Madagascar, where most of the work is done, and the global north is people are popular. So I think this kind of research, this kind of presentation of research would connect and create like a collaboration that would influence the policy making. This cannot be done in utilitarian way, but I think more together, because in Madagascar, research is not such valued, especially if like little guy like me would just say, okay, this is what you should do, this is what. I don't think it works like that, certainly not. But always the collaboration, and then to have the same vision about the problem, and then transform what local people said to amplify what local people said. I think only through that we can have an impact.
You want to comment on it? Yeah, I maybe to Vesa. We have written its climate forests together with Matthieu in relation to kind of how science and NGOs are important for in relation to international forest-related conventions. And today we heard from Tarin's presentations the kind of needs that the market has and how they are being packaged. I would ask you, what are the needs of policymakers in relation to these themes? And we have discussed
policymakers in relation to international conventions or
Yeah, so that you could utilize research, for example, from this project to bring it more to the level of global policymaking discussions. Of course, I know this is again not the one person's job, but what are you imagining?
well, of if we talk about the international climate and environment conventions, they all have the sort of research sort of interfaces between research and policy. They have the committees who are supposed to digest the international, not so much produced by themselves, but digest the international research results and bring through those mechanisms, then bring them the knowledge into the implementation of the conventions.
Mhm.
But of course, we all know, and I know the desertification convention best, not so much the others, that the research inputs can they trickle in, but that is it's gradual. And it may be quite limited because at the end of the day, they are the big political issues that are more important. Say whether we are going to establish an additional fund for this and that, and other issues that are then deemed more important by the decision makers. But one issue what the Finland, as part of the European Union, has always emphasized in connection with UNCCD, for instance, is to try to increase the role of research and science in that convention. I must say that I believe it is the European Union and its member countries that have in a way facilitated the, how should I say, the recognition of research and science in that convention, because in the beginning it was something quite different. And now there is a mechanism that much smaller than ICFIT or the IPCC in the other conventions, but there is a similar mechanism that now works and is now has been made permanent. In that sense, the comes in, trickles in, but also then gradually.
Okay. And I think the question also is small scale, so it's for development, not like a Crowther lab or something trees kind of research that has been ongoing. What would be your advice? How we could bring our research amplify them in the political system?
Well, be ready to, well, first of all, try to produce results already on the way and not only at the end. Well, I believe you do that already. Create good stories, narratives, because that's what the people may, and even decision makers may understand more clearly. I think I have a few other points I have listed also. Yeah, use stories, not just data. One good example in the drylands is the farmer-managed natural regeneration, which has produced very good results in a number of Sahelian countries. And that in a way challenged the traditional great green wall approach, and then showed that do it more gradual, piecemeal way, and with the local communities using natural regeneration and not planting trees. It has been quite successful in certain areas.
Yeah.
Such examples should be scaled.
There's an interesting scalable solutions,
right,
that have a good story also. We write it all down. Okay, thank you. I have a few minutes before I wanted to open up the discussion to the audience. I would like you to still maybe say a few kind of takeaways. This was a short panel, but just regarding policy making and research or NGO interface that you would want to put out still to the audience. Wants to start? I'm not gonna. Okay, Hanna.
Yes. I think these kind of discussions are important in a way to have different perspectives on the same time looking at, and I would somehow see that as one thing, like and how to evolve. And I think what Vesa said here when we were talking about that, how we, from coming from different backgrounds, in research, policy makers or private investors or us from civil society, that we see things a little bit differently, and how to make it more understanding that where are the differences and where do they come from, that how we see things and what is the right. Yeah, it's also that it's important to have this kind of discussions, even though now today it's very short, but anyway, to continue this kind of discussions openly with other actors.
Yes. Sometimes we see that there is an intervention project that is doing good things, but that is not enough. So we have, of course, we have all the good intention, but sometimes our knowledge is limited, and this research will provide like an opportunity for having like holistic view of different perspective of the people. Because, for example, talking about trees planting in Madagascar is like very different ecosystem with 18 tribes, different people. So only through research that you can understand what is needed, how it should be needed, and to have a like kind of win-win and the same power position. And I hope, with my personal idea, that because through the research we have taken a lot from the local people, like their knowledge, their time, and everything they have. So I hope there will be like some way around, like it is us to bring the knowledge that will impact them, will benefit them. Not only like, okay, research, like we take like everything and develop, but also because some research is state at the high scale, but some doesn't like really impact the local people, so we should consider that.
I think we need to be strategic as researchers. I think that it's very important that that projects don't just focus on the trees. But if we're to incorporate things like political economy analysis and policy analysis to be able to identify the spaces where they might actually make the most impact, where their results might be the most welcome, where people might actually, who are making decisions, might actually be in a situation where, you know, they just don't know what to do. And sometimes that will be, you know, not at the highest, flashiest level of decision making. It's going to be much harder to, you know, influence like the discourses that are being put out by multilateral organizations from a small project perspective, than it is going to be to influence decisions that are being made like at a municipal or regional level, where decision makers are much closer to those landscapes and might even come from them and have different perspective and more receptivity to our messages. That's not necessarily always the case. But yeah, so yeah, looking to where those entry points are as part of the research process, and experimenting, being creative with our communications is very important. You know, we like to make policy briefs and things like that, but they don't get read quite often. You know, we'll make policy facing websites that never get looked at. You know, we'll make animations because we think they're easier to digest, and yeah, they might be ignored. But yeah, but if we talk to people, if we put ourselves in those spaces that we think might be promising, and and just point out why our perspectives are useful, we might have much better luck.
Thanks for generously sharing your experience. Vesa, please.
Well, perhaps some points. I think some of this have already been taken up. I mean, co-producing knowledge with practitioners and policymakers. Well, this is participatory research with communities and farmers and landowners. This is something I believe you do in this project already. Then apart from policy briefs, which we like to emphasize in any research that the ministry is supporting either directly or through the Academy of Finland, like the program you are now running. The short, clear, actionable outputs, apart from policy briefs, maybe restoration guidelines in this case, maps and other visuals. Then, well, use stories, not just data that I didn't mention already. And then perhaps making research actionable at various scales, if that would be possible. Local, regional, national if possible, and even wider.
Thank you for sharing these recommendations as well. We have a few minutes time for questions, and then I would still like to read one closing poem before we go out for lunch. So yes, Maria, please go ahead.
I have two questions. I'll try to keep them in now. One is this going backstage. I found it very, that Emma was talking about, I found it very surprising that is how we think of ecological restoration, because I came in contact with ecological restoration through this ecosystem restoration alliances, grassroots networks that are connecting. And I had read the work of Judith Schwartz that have written on and I know her personally quite well. And she was also always talking, and they were also always talking about repairing nutrient cycles, repairing water cycles, and focusing on the ecological processes. And so coming into even our field, I got very stuck with people debating, well, what's the past that we are going to, and we cannot have that as. So I'm just wondering, is that really what you see that's going on in the debates on ecological restoration, that it is this past that is informing? Because my sense, working with those that are actually doing a lot of ecological restoration, is that the focus is on the cycles.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I would agree that there's a different understanding of what restoration is among ecologists and practitioners on the ground than there is at kind of a higher, more like cultural level, one might say.
Yeah.
I think among the general public, among a lot of policymakers, among a lot of people who have a lot of money to put into these projects, the vision is, especially considering the strength of the crisis narrative, the planet is broken sort of thing that's become very internalized and affects people quite profoundly. When people hear about restoration, they do think golden age. They do think, we need to take it back to before the damage happened, and then we can make it a different trajectory. And so this is an important source of contestation, like I was speaking about yesterday. We're talking about what nature is and what our objectives are when we're out in the world doing projects, doing research, making partnerships. I think there is definitely a reality of this kind of fetishization of an imagined past that's happening when people think about restoration that is important. And that's not to say that everybody who does restoration holds that view. And that's definitely not the case with many ecologists that I've worked with and interacted with on this. And it's not reflected in some of the more kind of finer grained methodological and literature and commentaries. But yeah, I think, I didn't mean to overgeneralize. But I'm talking about more kind of the cultural level of, what we're thinking about when we think about restoration in a broad sense.
My second question.
Wait, is there any other questions? Tesfaye,
There's
one
one
more
question.
There is lunch. Yes, Tesfaye, please.
Thank you.
I have two questions. The first question is,
One.
if it is one, in the case of ecological restoration, in most of the time, there is no equity and equitability, especially in Africa or in other South America countries. There are a lot of forests are degraded. But in the case of ecological restoration, these countries do not get the same financial budget or the same collaboration. So how do you see the equity and the equitability for ecological restoration in developing countries?
To briefly touch upon this topic, or then we can have it during the lunch discussion. Financing. I think I'm watching, luckily I don't see you, but you are saying my time is up. Okay, let me use this last 4 minutes for the tool. Okay, sorry. Tesfaye, I think we will address your question during the lunch, if that's okay. I want to finish our seminar also with a poem, a piece of eco poetry from Ethiopia. It concerns the Lake Haramaya. It's located in eastern Ethiopia, and this lake, which was 5 square kilometers, dried up fully in 2004. It has been restored thanks to University of Aramaya's coordination of a massive rehabilitation to half of its size in the last 5 years. But this poem is from the time when the lake had dried up. It's written by named Abraham in an online platform with the title Deg Aheberekiti, which means that the good ones will not survive, or they will not live long. And the poet describes expressions of grief, loss, and the potential for ecological restoration on the Lake Haramaya. So let me read the poem and then a brief analysis, which is conducted by a scholar, Shinafi Belai Adunya, on some of the meanings related to the poem. Until the last drop, until the last gulp of air, until its beauty perishes and surrenders, how can silence parallel its worth? The people of Hararge wept, shed their tears, in always recalling their hardship time delivered. Woe to Alemaya, the riches and comfort of Harar. Does a lake die a human's death? Who killed it? I will not ask. On whose hand it passed away? I will never say. Because I see the cry of its blood of the assets of Hararge. Despite the countless humbleness, evidence, and deep love, as there is a curse on our land, the benevolent never lasts long. So these lines, based on Ashinafi Belai's Adunya's analysis of eco poetry, they offer a really poignant exploration of ecological grief. The lake, which has been personified as a dying entity, desperately grasps for its last drop, last gulp of air. This juxtaposition of the lake's existential struggle against the indifferent silence of the people underscores the tragedy of a life-giving entity ignored in its final moments. The speaker's query, how can silence parallel its worth, serves as a scornful indictment of the people who mourn the lake's loss but fail to act. The line, who killed it, I will not ask, indicates a collective responsibility instead of blaming. By endowing it with a voice, the poem humanizes the lake, making its loss more palpable and its exploitation more morally reprehensible. The poem concludes with a complex interplay of despair and hope. And while the final lines suggest a sense of collective guilt and remorse, they also imply a potential for redemption. By portraying the lake as a symbol of compassion and love, it evokes a profound sense of shame for its demise. This emotional trajectory from lament to anger and ultimately up to introspection, transforms the poem from a mere elegy into a catalyst for change. Thank you. I will end the panel and so far the seminar with these lines. And I want to say thank you for our wonderful panelists for joining this discussion today. And I think they deserve a big applause.